Now that is a lot about preparing the road trip. So you have your apps, you have your RFIDs, you have your route more or less planned, either in great detail or more or less, and then you just see where you end up at that point, right? Now, what do I do when I'm actually on the road trip? So I only use the Tesla navigation, right? I know more or less the route that I'm doing. I use the Tesla navigation, which is, in my opinion, it's still great because it takes the supercharging into account, it takes elevation into account, it takes your consumption into account. But that consumption is highly dependent on your driving style, of course. So the first thing you need to know is you need to know your car. Right? You need to know, is what Tesla is telling me, is that the same as the way I'm driving, right? If not, then you adjust for a factor. So for example, I always charge 15% additionally, and about 25 to 30% additionally when I drive to Germany. I guess you know why. So yeah, that is something that I do take into account. But I do know my car, and next to the navigation and the stops, I know that Tesla in the navigation is always keeping it on the safe side. That means that it tries to let you arrive at the supercharger with about 20% charge left. Right? Now, that is a bit too much. If you want to charge fast, you try to arrive with 10 to 15% state of charge left in your battery when you arrive at the supercharger. That will get you the fastest charging times, because the charging curve will go up and then it will go down again once the charge rate goes up, right? Because as I explained before in the supercharger video, so you try to fill up as fast as possible. So at first you pour all the way into the glass or your battery, and then it will gradually start tapering off as not to spill over the battery, because that would damage your battery. So the lower your state of charge, the higher it goes. But if you go really low, then it will also take care of the battery and be more cautious for the first few minutes until the battery can take the full load of the 120 kilowatts. Yeah, the Tesla navigation, it does have some quirks that it lets you take the off-ramp and then the on-ramp again for the same highway. I see a lot of people complaining about that. It's not hard to just use your common sense and say, okay, I'm just driving straight on, I'm not getting off the highway in this case, right? Also keep in mind, if you have your trip planner option on and Tesla doesn't see a supercharger or a known charging location between your starting point and end point, but you know, for example, at your end point it's an apartment, I can charge there, it will still try to route you to the nearest supercharger to charge up to make sure that you get to your destination. And sometimes that can lead to a funny example like we have here in this picture, where in Sweden we were going like 200 kilometers, 150 kilometers, can't remember anymore, but we did a detour into Norway, and that detour was about 500 kilometers or something, to just use a supercharger. So yeah, you know that this is not right, and you can get there and you will have a charging station there. Then just turn off the trip planner or ignore the navigation for a while until it actually catches on. Another thing to try to keep in mind is the fact that you don't need to charge up, you don't need to fill up your car like you do with a gas car, right? You charge your car until you reach the next stop, which can be the next supercharger or maybe the supercharger after that, depending on how long you want to drive in one go. So you arrive with 10 to 15%, you charge up to, let's say, maybe 70%, then you drive for another 2 to 3 hours, then you're down to 10% again, you charge up to 60% this time, you drive 2 hours, and then it's lunchtime, right? You're down to about 10%, maybe 15%. You go to lunch, you plug in your car, lunch takes a little bit longer, so you charge up again to 90%, and then you continue on your journey. If you charge up to 90% each and every time, you will lose a lot of time charging. And also at the next supercharger that you're stopping, you will arrive maybe with 20-25% left, and then your charge rate will also be slower than when you arrive with 10%. So try to keep that in mind, that you don't fill up your car like you do with the gas car, right? You charge your car until the next stop, and there you charge it again. If you don't seem to be getting to your next location, we did that once, right? So we drove to Sweden, and we took the boat in Kiel, Germany, and I calculated everything, right? I'm nerdy like that, right? I calculated that in Sweden we had to drive like 85 kilometers to the first supercharger, because there wasn't one closer at that point, and I calculated my 50% to the 15% added to that, and then we arrived in Kiel way too soon. Right, the boat was still not there. There was nobody on the parking lot. So we had the brilliant idea to just drive off to the side a little bit to visit the U-boat that was lying there. But those were kilometers that I didn't take into account. Right, so not much. Didn't think about it that much because I still had plenty left at that point, until the next morning we disembarked the boat. The navigation caught up, and then it showed, well, you're going to arrive at the supercharger with -4%, with no charger in between. So yeah, that was kind of a freaking out point, especially for my wife. For me, I was trying to hide it. I was like, yeah, we're going to be fine, we're going to be fine. And indeed, we were going to be fine, because all I did was drive 110 kilometers an hour instead of 120. And we arrived at the supercharger with 2 kilometers left on the battery. So yeah, I mean, speed is everything. Your driving style, your speed. So you try to be as consistent as possible. And 110 kilometers an hour is a really an optimal speed or highway speed for a Tesla to be at. And that gave us the 4% back on just about 80-90 kilometers of driving. So yeah, don't worry if you see that you're getting a few kilometers short. Just drive a little bit slower and you'll be fine. Now, as for driving speeds, I calculate that with the family I'm doing 85 kilometers an hour, or about 53 miles per hour on average, all included. So that means food, pit stops, getting some drinks, charging, whatever, letting the kids play a little bit. So that's usually around 85 kilometers an hour, or 53 miles per hour. If I'm traveling alone, I can get that up to about 90 kilometers an hour, especially over longer distances. Now, of course, that also depends from country to country, right? Like, if you go to the top of Norway, there your average speed is about 70 or 80 kilometers an hour that you can do on those roads. They're not really the highways that we have in Central Europe. So yeah, you have to account for that depending on the country you're in. But in the Central European region and towards the south, this is for me something that works, counting on 85 kilometers an hour, or doing a 850 kilometer trip or a 530 mile trip in about 10 hours then. And that seems to work out each and every time for me. Now, one last thing I want to give you as a piece of advice when you take on your first road trip, or maybe not just for road trips, but also for daily driving, is any juice is good juice as long as you're not waiting for it. So plug in your car whenever you can, soak up some electrons whenever you can, and you don't have to worry about filling up. You don't have to worry about finding the next charging spot as much as when you just try to charge at superchargers, right? Use what is there, use the infrastructure that is there, and the infrastructure is still growing, and just enjoy the trip, right? So for all of you that are going on a holiday this summer with their Tesla, enjoy, right? It will be, if it's your first one, it will be an unforgettable drive because it's so relaxing and you'll never want to travel any other way again. And as usual, if you like my channel, please subscribe to the channel using that button there. And don't forget to click that little bell icon so you don't miss out on any new videos. And for now, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. See you guys next time. Bye bye.